Sometimes I wish I could just delete my own memory, like pushing a button and erasing everything. But I can't. I carry this with me every day, and I know that one day it will consume me completely. I grew up in a small town in rural Louisiana, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and if you mess up, your neighbor will know before you even get home. I've spent my whole life here, in the stifling heat, among the swamps and streets that smell like oil and wet earth. My wife, Veronica, was my rock. We met at church when we were teenagers. She had that sweet way about her, always with a smile for everyone, and I fell in love easily. We married young because, in my head, that's what made a man a man. Getting married, taking care of his wife, having kids, and never letting them want for anything. And for 8 years, that's exactly what I did. Then there was Greg. Greg had been my friend for as long as I could remember. Tall, awkward kid, but with a good heart. We grew up side by side, next-door neighbors, sharing bikes and secrets. He was the kind of guy you'd trust your life with, or at least, that's what I thought. Greg became the godfather of my daughter, Emily. Always present, always willing to help, always with a word of advice. He was practically my brother. But like I said, sometimes the person closest to you is the one who can stick the knife in the deepest. It all started with little things. Veronica started to become distant. At first, it was just silly arguments, you know, couple stuff. I'd talk, she'd ignore me. She'd lock herself in the bedroom, and I just thought she was tired or PMSing. Greg would tell me, "Dude, women are like that. Give her space, don't crowd her or it'll just get worse." I listened because he always had the right thing to say, and I trusted him. But as the months went by, Veronica got colder and colder. She got a job at an accounting office, something she'd never shown any interest in before. I thought it was strange. I always made a point of providing for the house. I busted my ass at work so she and Emily could have everything. She said she wanted independence. I thought she was just trying to keep busy, thought it was a phase. But the phase didn't pass. She started coming home later and later. She said it was the demands of the office, that they were overwhelming her. She hired a babysitter to take care of our daughter. She hardly spent any time at home anymore. Our bedroom turned into a desert. She barely even looked at me, and when I tried to touch her, there was always an excuse. Headache, exhaustion, not feeling well. I started to get desperate, trying to understand. I asked, I begged. Nothing. Just silence. I talked to Greg, of course. He told me not to make a mountain out of a molehill, that Veronica was too straight-laced to do anything wrong. You're imagining things. She loves you. Maybe she's just stressed. And I wanted to believe him, I really did. Until that day. I came home early from work, a Friday. Rare thing because I usually stayed late closing the reports. I walked in without making a sound. On the living room couch, there they were, Veronica relaxed, drinking a Coke and eating fries, and Greg next to her, like he owned the place. They both laughed at something until they saw me standing there. Their reaction was too quick, but not quick enough. They froze for a second. She dropped the glass on her lap, and he adjusted himself on the couch, swallowing hard. Danny, you're home early, man." "Hi, honey. Did everything go well at work?" she asked with a nervous smile. I didn't say anything. I sat down with them, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. She said she left early because the office was being renovated. Greg cracked a joke, trying to lighten the mood. But I knew. I felt it. It was that kind of feeling that starts to eat you up inside. You know something's wrong, even when no one tells you. In the following days, things only got worse. Veronica became even more distant. Greg still came to the house, playing the friend. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, hearing footsteps in the hallway. I always thought it was Emily, but it never was. My head was a mess. I started to drink more. I went to the bars in town after work, just trying to silence that voice inside me, telling me I was an idiot. It was on one of those nights that I met him. The place was a dive near the highway, smelling of stale beer and burnt cigarettes. I was in the corner, drowning in my own poison, when I noticed an old man sitting at a table in the back, staring at me. He had pale eyes, as if they were made of dirty glass. When I raised my glass in an automatic gesture, he didn't even blink. He just stood there, motionless. After a while, he approached me. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a nightmare. Ragged clothes, parched skin, disheveled white hair. He had a bottle of whiskey in his hand. "A toast, son," he said, his voice hoarse, scratchy like sand. I laughed humorlessly. "A toast to what?" "They say pain tastes bitter, but I can teach you how to make it sweet." That caught me off guard. I should have ignored him. I should have left. But in that moment, I just wanted to erase everything. "My wife cheated on me with my best friend," I blurted out without a filter. "And I'm fucked." He smiled with crooked yellow teeth. "Well, I can fix that for you." I didn't ask how. I didn't ask why. I just said yes. At that moment, the old man put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was cold, dry as rotten wood. "Come by my place tomorrow, son. We'll take that weight off your chest." And he gave me a crumpled piece of paper with an address written on it by hand. It was in the middle of the swamps, a place where no one goes, a place where no one returns. I should have thrown that paper away. I should have torn it up right then and there in that fetid bar and gone home. But I didn't. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket like someone saving an emergency cigarette. Like someone who knows, deep down, that they're going to end up using it. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of the old fan, with that address burning inside my head. On the paper, it just said, Cyrus, 781 Black Hollow Road. An address at the end of the world. Black Hollow was a forgotten place near the swamps, where the roads turn to mud and the cell phone signal dies. But in the morning, with my stomach churning and the bitter taste of the hangover in my mouth, I got in my car and went there anyway. It took almost an hour to get off the asphalt and into a maze of twisted trees and stagnant water. The smell was of dead, rotten things. The heat made sweat run down my back, sticking my shirt to me. When I finally found the house, I thought about turning back. It was a broken-down shack with rotten boards, windows covered with cloths, and a crooked porch. In the yard, a dirty chicken coop and a rusty cage with a raven inside. The raven looked at me, pecking its beak against the iron, as if it knew something I didn't. Before I could change my mind, the door creaked open. Cyrus was there, leaning against the jamb, smiling with that mouth full of stained teeth. "I knew you'd come, son. It's written on the face of someone who's already lost everything." He signaled for me to come in. The smell inside was even worse, something between burnt herbs, wet earth, and iron, like old blood. There were candles scattered everywhere, rag dolls hanging from the ceiling, jars full of things I didn't even want to identify. In the center of the room, a circle drawn on the floor, made with ashes and coarse salt. "Do you still want the pain to go away?" he asked, staring at me as if he could see right through me. I should have said no. I should have run from there. But I just nodded. He went to a closet, took out a curved blade knife, and handed me a small clay bowl. "I need something of yours, something from inside." Before I could ask, he grabbed my arm and made a deep cut in the palm of my hand. The blood dripped into the bowl. Then he looked at me and said, "Do you have something of theirs? A photo? A piece of clothing?" I did. I don't know why, but that morning before leaving, I grabbed an old photo from the shelf. Me, Veronica, Greg, and my daughter Emily at a barbecue 2 summers ago, all smiling. The irony made me want to laugh. Cyrus took the photo, looked at it for a few seconds, and put it inside the circle on the floor. He began to speak softly, in a language I didn't understand. Something guttural, scratchy, that seemed to come from somewhere too old. The candles flickered, even though there was no wind. He took a black chicken that was tied up in a corner, whispered something in the animal's ear, and with a quick movement he cut its throat. The blood splattered on the floor. The raven in the cage screamed loudly, as if it understood everything. Then it was a black cat, a toad. Their eyes were empty. I should have felt disgust, fear, but I just felt empty, and a rage that burned me. 2 hours passed in that cabin. When he finished, Cyrus looked at me, his eyes more opaque than before. "The work is done, son. There's no turning back now." I asked what was going to happen. He smiled, but said nothing. Before I left, he handed me a small, cracked mirror. "When it starts, look into it. You'll see that the world changes." In the first few days, nothing happened. Veronica remained cold, distant. Greg disappeared, stopped coming to my house. I thought maybe it was just theater, a drunken ritual. But then, one morning, I heard Veronica crying in the bathroom. She came out with a towel wrapped around her head, and I noticed clumps of hair on the floor. She was losing her hair, in handfuls. She tried to disguise it, talked about stress, about work. But I saw in her face that she knew it was more than that. That night, I received a message from Greg. He never sent messages at that hour. I opened it. It was an audio message, his voice trembling, almost unrecognizable. "She's coming. Every night. She doesn't let me sleep. She stays in the corner of the room, just watching. No matter where I am, she's there." I listened to that with an eerie calm. It was working. Days turned into weeks. Veronica got thinner. Her hair almost didn't exist anymore, her skin full of blemishes. She walked around the house like a ghost, eyes sunken, always looking at me as if she knew I was responsible, but without the courage to say it. Greg, well, he didn't last long. I found out from a neighbor that he was found dead. He jumped off the old bridge near the town. No one understood why, but I knew. I knew. That night, I stared into the cracked mirror that Cyrus gave me. For a second, I thought I saw Greg's eyes reflected there, empty, fixed on me. I blinked. The face disappeared, but the cold in my chest didn't go away. Veronica was lying on the couch when I went back to the living room. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her head without a strand of hair. The face that I once loved now looked like a dead face. She tried to say something, but I just walked past her and went upstairs. Up there, I looked at the mirror one more time. I should have been satisfied. I should have felt avenged. But for the first time in weeks, I started to wonder if I had opened a door that I didn't know how to close. After Greg died, and Veronica began to wither, I thought things would finally end. That maybe I could start over, as if removing them from my life was enough to take away the pain too. But it doesn't work that way. The house became silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy silence, full of something I didn't know how to name. Veronica hardly left the room anymore. She couldn't walk right anymore. Her bones seemed like glass, always sore, fragile. The skin hanging on her face, her hands shaking, her eyes sunken like black holes. I even avoided looking at her for too long because it seemed that if I stared too much, something would look back. She tried to ask for help several times. She asked me to take her to doctors in other cities. She asked us to pray together. But I just said it would pass, that it was just weakness, lies. I knew she was already doomed, and that's exactly how it happened. One random morning, I went to the room and she was motionless, her eyes open but empty. There was no one else in there anymore. I didn't cry, I didn't call anyone right away. I stood there for a few minutes looking at her, and for the first time in years I felt a strange kind of peace, as if everything had finally come to an end. But fake peace doesn't last long. The following weeks were normal, or at least normal on paper. I went back to work, left my daughter Emily with a relative because I needed to organize the things in the house. The neighbors, of course, whispered. Everyone in town knew about the tragedies, but no one said anything to my face. But I couldn't sleep anymore. It was as if every time I closed my eyes, something was watching me from the edge of the bed. At first, I thought it was just guilt or imagination, but then came the sounds. Footsteps scraping through the hallway, low, muffled laughter coming from downstairs. Once I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I saw someone standing in the bedroom door. Just a blur, too fast to be sure. I started to lose weight, a lot. My co-workers started to comment. I went to the doctor, had tests done. Nothing wrong, they said, maybe stress, anxiety. But the problem is that it wasn't just the body. It was everything. I tried to talk to women, I tried to move on, but I couldn't. It was as if a shadow was always stuck to me, as if I carried a bad smell that no one wanted to be around. Even my daughter, when she came to visit, was restless. She said she heard strange things around the house. She ended up going to live with an aunt in another city. I was left alone. On Friday the 13th of that year, I remember because I looked at the calendar by chance, something finally broke completely. I took a shower at night, tired, wanting to switch off. When I finished, the bathroom light started to flicker. I thought it was just a fault in the wiring, old like everything in the house. I went to brush my teeth. I looked in the mirror. That's when I saw it. First, I thought it was a wrong reflection, but no. In the mirror, right behind my shoulder, they were Greg and Veronica. Only not exactly them. Their faces were distorted, grey skin, red eyes, shining. They both stared at me, serious, motionless, and then they smiled. That kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The lights went out completely, and in the dark, I heard it. Here in hell, there's a place just for you. We're waiting. Since that night, I know there's no way out. The whole house seems alive. There are days when I see blurs running out of the corner of my eye. I smell something burning for no reason. Sometimes I wake up with scratches on my arm, on my neck. I can't sleep well anymore. I also can't gain weight, nor feel pleasure, nor want to be with anyone. It seems like everything I've touched since that day rots. They ask me why I never moved out of here. But wherever I go, they'll go with me. The price I paid wasn't just for accepting help from that old man in the swamp. It was for opening a door inside myself that can no longer be closed. And now, every time I look in the mirror, I see that I'm becoming more like them. Sunken eyes, colorless skin, all that's missing is the smile.